Bezalel. Bezalel was, first of all, of a noble line. His father, Hur, was a son of Caleb from his union with Miriam, Moses' sister. That same Hur who gave his life to restrain Israel from the worship of the golden calf. As a reward for his martyrdom, his son, Bezalel, was to build the tabernacle, and one of his later descendants, King Solomon, was to build the temple at Jerusalem. Bezalel was not only of a distinguished family, he was himself a man of distinction, possessed of wisdom, insight, and understanding. And by means of these three God created the world, and Bezalel erected the temple. Through their aid the temple was completed, and even in the future world it will be wisdom, insight, and understanding that God will employ to set up the new temple. Bezalel, furthermore, had wisdom in the Torah, insight into the Halakha, and understanding in the Talmud. But more than this, he was well versed in secret lore, knowing as he did the combination of letters by means of which God created heaven and earth. The name Bezalel, in the shadow of God, was most appropriate for this man whose wisdom made clear to him what no one could know except one who lived in the shadow of God. Moses had an instant opportunity of testing the wisdom of this builder appointed by God. God had bidden Moses first to erect the tabernacle, then the holy ark, and lastly, to prepare the furnishings of the tabernacle. But Moses, to put Bezalel's wisdom to the test, ordered him to construct first the holy ark, then the furnishings of the tabernacle, and only then the sanctuary. But Bezalel said to Moses, "O, our teacher Moses, it is the way of man first to build his house, and only then to provide its furnishings. You tell me first to provide furnishings, and then build a sanctuary. What shall I do with the furnishings when there is no sanctuary ready to receive them?" Moses, delighted with Bezalel's wisdom, replied, "Now, truly, the command was given just as you say. Were you perchance in the shadow of God that you knew this?" Although God knew that Bezalel was the right man for the erection of the tabernacle, still he asked Moses, "Do you consider Bezalel suited to this task?" Moses replied, "O Lord of the world, if you consider him suitable, then surely I do." But God said, "Go and ask Israel if they approve my choice of Bezalel." Moses did as he was bidden, and the people assented in these words, "If Bezalel is judged good enough by God and by you, assuredly he is approved by us." As the builder of the tabernacle, God gave Bezalel 5 other names to bear. He called him Reaiah, to behold, for Bezalel was beheld by God, by Moses, and by Israel, as the one who had been decreed for this activity since the beginning of the world. He called him the son of Shobal, because he had erected the tabernacle that towered high. He called him Jahaz, the trembler, because he made the sanctuary, the seat of the fear of God. He called him Ahamai, because, through his work, the sanctuary, Israel, and God were united. And finally Lahad, as the one who brought splendor and loftiness to Israel, for the sanctuary is the pride and splendor of Israel. At the side of Bezalel worked Oholiab, of the insignificant tribe of Dan, to show that, before God, the great and the lowly are equal. As the tabernacle rose, thanks to the combined efforts of a Judean and a Danite, so did the temple of Jerusalem, which was built at the command of the Judean, Solomon, by the Danite, Hiram. As the head workers of the tabernacle were filled with the Holy Spirit in order to accomplish their task correctly, so too were all who aided in its construction. Yes, even the beasts that were employed on this occasion possessed wisdom, insight, and understanding. The Ark with the Cherubim. The very first thing that Bezalel constructed was the Ark of the Covenant, contrary to Moses' order, first to erect the tabernacle and then to supply its separate furnishings. He succeeded in convincing Moses that it was the proper thing to begin with the ark, saying, "What is the purpose of this tabernacle?" Moses, that God may let his Shekinah rest therein, and so teach the Torah to his people, Israel. Bezalel: And where do you keep the Torah? Moses: As soon as the tabernacle shall have been complete, we shall make the ark for keeping the Torah. Bezalel: O our teacher Moses, it does not become the dignity of the Torah that in the meantime it should lie around like this. Let us first rather make the ark, put the Torah into it, and then continue with the erection of the tabernacle, for the tabernacle exists only for the sake of the Torah. Moses saw the justice of this argument, and Bezalel began his work with the construction of the ark. In this he followed the example of God, who created light before all the rest of creation. So Bezalel first constructed the ark that contains the Torah, the light that illuminates this world and the future world, and only then followed the rest. The ark consisted of 3 caskets, a gold one, the length of 3 spans and a fractional part, and within this a wooden one, 9 spans long, and within that wooden one of gold, 8 spans long, so that within and without the ark was overlaid with golden caskets. The ark contained the 2 tablets of the 10 Commandments as well as the ineffable name. The ark was an image of the celestial throne, and therefore the most essential part of the tabernacle, so that even during the march it was spread over with a cloth of blue, because this color is similar to the color of the celestial throne. It was through the ark also that the miracles on the way through the desert had been wrought. There were 2 sparks that issued from the cherubim that shaded the ark, and these killed all the serpents and scorpions that crossed the path of the Israelites. And furthermore, they burned all thorns that threatened to injure the wanderers on their march through the desert. The smoke rising from these scorched thorns, moreover, rose straight as a column, and shed a fragrance that perfumed all the world, so that the nations exclaimed, Who is this that comes out of the wilderness like pillars of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all the powders of the merchant? Apart from this ark, which was kept in the tabernacle, they had another ark, in which were contained the tables broken by Moses, which they carried with them whenever they went to war. The ark that Bezalel constructed was also used again in Solomon's temple, for he retained the ark used by Moses in the tabernacle, even though all the other furnishings of the temple were fashioned anew. It remained there up to the time of the destruction of the temple by Nebuchadnezzar, when it was concealed under the pavement of the wood house, that it might not fall into the hands of the enemy. This place remained a secret for all time. Once a priest, looking about the wood house to see if something lay hidden under it, called out to his colleagues, but was suddenly stricken dead before divulging the secret. On the ark were the cherubim with their faces of boys and their wings. Their number was 2, corresponding to the 2 tables, and to the 2 sacred names of God, Adonai and Elohim, which characterized him as benevolent and powerful. The face of each cherub measured 1 span, and the wings extended 10 spans each, making 22 spans in all, corresponding to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. It was between the 2 cherubim that God communed with Moses, for the Shekinah never wholly descended to earth any more than any mortal ever quite mounted into heaven. Even Moses and Elijah stood a slight distance from heaven, for the heavens are the Lord's, but the earth he has given to the children of men. Therefore God chose the cherubim that were 10 spans above the earth as the place where the Shekinah went to commune with Moses. The heads of the cherubim were slightly turned back, like that of a scholar bidding his master farewell. But as a token of God's delight in his people Israel, the faces of the cherubim, by a miracle, looked to one another whenever Israel was worshiping the Lord, sometimes even clasping one another like a loving couple. During the festivals of the pilgrimage, the priest would raise the curtain from the Holy of Holies to show the pilgrims how much their God loved them, as they could see in the embrace of the 2 cherubim. A 2-fold miracle came to pass when the cherubim were brought into the temple by Solomon. The 2 staves that were attached to the ark extended until they touched the curtain, so that 2 protuberances, like a woman's breast, became visible at the back of it, and the wings of the cherubim furthermore extended until they reached the ceiling of the Holy of Holies. The tabernacle and the candlestick. While the number of cherubim was the same in the temple as in the tabernacle, Solomon had, on the other hand, 10 tables set up in the temple, in place of the one fashioned by Moses. This was because the one table sufficed to bring sustenance to Israel so long as they were maintained by manna in the desert. But as the demand for food was greater after they settled in the Promised Land, Solomon had 10 tables set up. But in the temple the table of Moses retained its ancient significance, for only upon it was the showbread placed, and it stood in the center, whereas the tables fashioned by Solomon stood 5 to the north and 5 to the south. For from the south come the dews of blessing and the rains of plenty, while all evil comes from the north. Hence Solomon said, "The tables of the south shall cause the rains of plenty and the dews of blessing to come upon the earth, while the tables of the north shall keep off all evil from Israel." Moses had great difficulty with the construction of the candlestick, for although God had given him instructions about it, he completely forgot these when he descended from heaven. He went back to God once again to be shown, but in vain, for hardly had he reached earth when he again forgot. When he went to God the third time, God took a candlestick of fire and plainly showed him every single detail of it, that he might now be able to construct the candlestick for the tabernacle. When he still found it hard to form a clear conception of the nature of the candlestick, God quieted him with these words, "Go to Bezalel, he will do it correctly." And indeed, Bezalel had no difficulty in doing so, and instantly executed Moses' commission. Moses cried in amazement, "God showed me repeatedly how to make the candlestick, yet I could not properly seize the idea. But you, without having it shown to you by God, could fashion it out of your own fund of knowledge. Truly, do you deserve the name Bezalel, in the shadow of God, for you act as if you had been in the shadow of God while he was showing me the candlestick." The candlestick was later set up in the temple of Solomon, and although he set up 10 other candlesticks, this one was to be lighted first. Solomon chose the number 10 because it corresponds to the number of words revealed on Sinai, and each of these candlesticks had 7 lamps, 70 in all, to correspond to the 70 nations. For while these lamps burned, the power of the nations was held in check, and on the day on which these lamps are extinguished, the power of the nations is increased. On account of its sacredness, the candlestick was one of the 5 sacred objects that God concealed at the destruction of the temple by Nebuchadnezzar, and that he will restore when, in his loving kindness, he will erect his house and temple. These sacred objects are the ark, the candlestick, the fire of the altar, the Holy Spirit of prophecy, and the cherubim. The altar. One of the most miraculous parts of the tabernacle was the altar, for when God told Moses to make an altar of wood and overlay it with brass, Moses said to God, "O Lord of the world, you told me to make the altar of wood and overlay it with brass, but you also told me to have a fire kept burning upon the altar continually. Will not the fire destroy the overlay of brass and then consume the wood of the altar?" God replied, "Moses, you judge by the laws that apply to men, but will these also apply to me? Behold the angels that are of burning flame. Besides them are my storehouses of snow and my storehouses of hail. Does the water quench their fire, or does their fire consume the water? Behold also the Hayyot that are of fire. Above their heads extends a terrible sea of ice that no mortal can traverse in less than 500 years. Yet does the water quench their fire, or does their fire consume the water? For I am the Lord who makes peace between these elements in my high places. But you, because I have bidden you to keep a fire burning upon the altar continually, are afraid that the wood might be consumed by the fire. Dead things come before me, and leave me imbued with life, and you are afraid that the wood of the altar might be consumed. Your own experience should by now have taught you better. You pierced the fiery chambers of heaven. You entered among the fiery hosts on high. Yes, you even approached me, and I am a consuming fire. Surely you should have been consumed by fire. But you were unscathed because you went into the fire at my command. The brass overlay of the altar will not be injured by fire, even though it be no thicker than a denarium. In the words, "Dead things come before me and leave me imbued with life," God alluded to the three following incidents. The rod of Aaron, after it had lain for a night in the sanctuary, brought forth buds and bloomed blossoms, and even yielded almonds. The cedars that Hiram, king of Tyre, sent to Solomon for the building of the temple, as soon as the incense of the sanctuary reached them, thrilled green anew, and throughout the centuries bore fruits, by means of which the young priests sustained themselves. Not until Manasseh brought the idol into the Holy of Holies did these cedars wither and cease to bear fruit. The third incident to which God alludes was the stretching of the staves of the ark when Solomon set them in the Holy of Holies, and the staves, after having been in the ark for 480 years, suddenly extended until they touched the curtain. Solomon erected a new altar for offerings, but knowing how dear to God was the altar erected by Moses, the brass altar, he at least retained the same name for his altar. But in the following words it is evident how much God prized the altar erected by Moses. For he said, "To reward Israel for having kept a fire burned upon the altar continually, I shall punish the kingdom laden with crime by fire that shall not be quenched night or day. The smoke thereof shall go up forever." Beside the brass altar there was also one of gold, which corresponded to the human soul, while the former corresponded to the body. And as gold is more valuable than brass, so also is the soul greater than the body. But both altars were used daily, as man must also serve his Maker with body and soul. On the brass altar, sacrifices were offered, as the body of a man, likewise, is nourished by food. But on the gold altar, spices and sweet incense, for the soul takes delight only in perfumes. The materials employed for the construction of the tabernacle, the skins and the wood, were not of common order. God created the animal Tahash exclusively for the needs of the tabernacle, for it was so enormous that out of one skin could be made a curtain 30 cubits long. This species of animal disappeared as soon as the demands of the tabernacle for skins were satisfied. The cedars for the tabernacle, also, were obtained in no common way, for where should they have gotten cedars in the desert? They owed these to their ancestor Jacob. When he reached Egypt, he planted a cedar grove and admonished his sons to do the same, saying, "You will, in the future, be released from bondage in Egypt, and God will then demand that you erect him a sanctuary to thank him for having delivered you. Plant cedar trees, then, that when God tells you to build him a sanctuary, you will have in your possession the cedars required for its construction." His sons acted in accordance with the bidding of their father, and upon leaving Egypt, took along the cedars for the anticipated erection of the sanctuary. Among these cedars was also the wonderful cedar of which was used for the middle bar in the midst of the boards that reach from end to end, which Jacob took with him from Palestine when he emigrated to Egypt, and then left to remain among his descendants. When the cedars were selected for the construction of the tabernacle, they intoned a song of praise to God for this distinction. But not all the 24 species of cedar were used for the tabernacle. No, not even the 7 most excellent among them were found worthy, but only the species shittim might be used. For God, who foresees all, knew that Israel would in the future commit a great sin at Shittim, and therefore attained that shittim wood be used for the tabernacle to serve as atonement for the sin committed. Shittim furthermore signifies follies. Hence Israel was to construct the place of penance for their folly in adoring the golden calf out of shittim wood, to atone for this folly. And finally, the letters of the word shittim, as composed, stand for shalom, peace, toba, good, Yeshua, salvation, and Mahillah, forgiveness. The boards that were made for the tabernacle out of shittim wood never decayed, but endure to all eternity. The symbolical significance of the tabernacle. The separate parts of the tabernacle each had a symbolical significance, for to all that is above there is something corresponding below. there are stars above, but likewise below, where a star shall come out of Jacob. God has his hosts above, and likewise below, his people Israel, the hosts of the Lord. Above are the Ophanim, and on earth likewise there is an Ophan. Above God has cherubim, and likewise below they are in the sanctuary of Israel. God has his dwelling above, but likewise below. And lastly, God has stretched out the heavens above like a curtain, and below in the sanctuary there were curtains of goat's hair. The number of curtains also corresponds to those in heaven, for as there are 11 upper heavens, so also were there 11 curtains of goat's hair. The size of the tabernacle was 70 cubits, corresponding to the 70 holy days celebrated annually by the Jews, 52 Sabbaths, 7 days of Passover, 8 of the tabernacles, and a day each for Pentecost, the Day of Atonement, and New Year's Day. The number of vessels also amounted to 70, as likewise God, Israel, and Jerusalem bear 70 names, and as correspondingly, in the time between the building of the first and second temple, there were 70 consecutive Sanhedrin. Like the tabernacle, so the altar too had its symbolic significance. Its length and its breadth were 5 cubits each, corresponding respectively to the 5 commandments on the 2 tables. Its height was 3 cubits, corresponding to the 3 deliverers God sent to deliver Israel from Egypt, Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. It had 4 horns in the corners to atone for the sins of the people that on Sinai received 4 horns, the horn of the Torah, the horn of the Shekinah, the horn of the priesthood, and the horn of the kingdom. In the tabernacle, as later in the temple, gold, silver, and brass were employed, but not iron. God meant to indicate by the exclusion of iron that, in the future time, the gold in Babylon, the silver Media, and the brass Greece would be permitted to bestow gifts on the new temple, but not the iron Rome. It is true that Babylon also destroyed the sanctuary of God, like Rome, but not with such fury and thoroughgoing wrath as Rome, whose sons cried, destroy it even to the foundations." And for this reason Rome may not contribute to the Messianic temple. And as God will reject the gifts of Rome, so also will the Messiah, to whom all the nations of the earth will have to offer gifts. Egypt will come with her gifts, and although the Messiah will at first refuse to accept anything from the former taskmaster of Israel, God will say to him, "The Egyptians granted my children an abode in their land. Do not repulse them." Then the Messiah will accept their gift. After Egypt will follow her neighbor, Ethiopia, with her gifts, thinking that if the Messiah accepted gifts from the former taskmaster, he will also accept gifts from her. Then the Messiah will also accept Ethiopia's gifts. After these 2 kingdoms will follow all the others with their gifts, and all will be accepted except those from Rome. This kingdom will be sorely disappointed, for, depending on their kinship with Israel, they will expect kind treatment from the Messiah, who had graciously received the other nations not connected with Israel. But God will call out to the Messiah, "Roar at this monster that devours the fat of nations, that justifies its claim for recognition through being a descendant of Abraham by his grandson Esau, the nation that forgives all for the sake of money, that kept Israel back from the study of the Torah and tempted them to the depths that are in accordance with the wishes of Satan." The priestly robes. Simultaneously with the construction of the tabernacle and its vessels were fashioned the priestly robes for Aaron and his sons. It was at this time that God made known Aaron's appointment to the office of high priest, saying, "Go and appoint a high priest." Moses, out of which tribe? God, of the tribe of Levi. Moses was most happy hearing that the high priest was to be chosen out of his tribe, and his joy was increased when God added, "Appoint your brother Aaron as high priest." This choice of Aaron was, of course, also a disappointment to Moses, who had hoped God would appoint him as his high priest. But God had designed this dignity for Aaron to reward him for his pious deeds when Israel worshipped the golden calf. For when Moses returned from Sinai and saw the calf fashioned by Aaron, he thought his brother was no better than the rest of the people, and like them devoted himself to idolatry. But God knew that Aaron's participation in the construction of the calf was merely due to the pious motive of delaying the people until Moses returned. Hence, he even said to Aaron, "I am fully aware of your motive. As truly as you live, I shall appoint you as warden over the sacrifices that my children offer me." In consideration of Moses' feelings, God gave into his hands the appointment of Aaron, saying to him, "I might have installed your brother as high priest without having informed you, but I relinquish this appointment to you, that you may have the opportunity of showing the people your humility, in that you do not seek this high office for yourself." At God's bidding, Aaron and his 2 sons were now chosen as priests, and moreover, not for a limited period, but Aaron and his house were invested with the priesthood for all eternity. As soon as they were installed as priests, Moses set to work to instruct them thoroughly in the priestly laws. God ordered the following 8 garments as Aaron's garb: coat, breeches, mitre, girdle, breastplate, ephod, robe, and golden plate. But his sons needed only the first 4 garments. All these garments had expiatory virtues, and each expiated a definite sin. The coat atoned for murder, the breeches for unchastity, the mitre for pride, the girdle for theft, the breastplate for partial verdicts, the ephod for idolatry, the bells on the robe for slander, and the golden plate for insolence. The breastplate and the ephod were set with precious stones, which were the gifts of the nobles to the sanctuary, though, to be exact, they were in reality a gift from God. For precious stones and pearls had rained down with the manna, which the nobles among Israel had gathered up and laid away until the tabernacle was erected, when they offered them as gifts. The ephod had only 2 precious stones, 1 on each shoulder, and on each of these stones were engraved the names of the 6 tribes, in the following order: Reuben, Levi, Issachar, Naphtali, Gad, and Jehoshaph on the right shoulder piece; Simon, Judah, Zebulun, Gad, Asher, and Benjamin on the left shoulder. The name Joseph was spelled Jehoshaph, a device by which the 2 stones had exactly the same number of letters engraved on them. On the breastplate were 12 precious stones, on which the names of the 3 patriarchs preceded those of the 12 tribes, and at the end were engraved the words, "All these are the 12 tribes of Israel." Next, the stones in the breastplate. End part 55 of 95, TheLegendsOfTheJews.com.